Hey, good afternoon. This is the Property Committee meeting on December 12th. And we have our quorum and we have the usual staff that's here to support us. And I'll start off, Patrick, with looking for a motion to approve the minutes from November 16th.
Motion to approve.
I'll second that.
All in favor?
Aye.
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 Ayes have it.
Okay, and so as directed by the mayor, he thought that maybe we didn't need to continue studying because of the depth of knowledge of staff on this topic and RFPs, if we could just sort of highlight and discuss additional details that we would want to go with the new round. I did want to ask before we get started in that, because the mayor also thought we should have another mandatory on-site visit.
Mm-hmm.
And remind me, does that happen after the RFP is published? So that people know okay.
The dates and it would be in the RFP of when that would occur.
Okay, so that will, just so that people know, when we meet in January, we'll be looking at a draft of a new one.
Mm-hmm.
We'll then nail down a date based on how that goes. Does that sound like the flow there?
Mhm.
Commissioner, if I could.
Yeah.
So you're correct. That once a draft is finalized and approved by the committee for posting, we'll work with the finance department to get it posted. And then typically anywhere from 10 to 14 days after the official posting of the RFP is when we hold some sort of a site visit. And that still allows for time thereafter, based on anything they see on site, to be able to change or amend their proposal. So it usually occurs 10 to 14 days and then gives about another 2 to 3 weeks thereafter for them to meet the deadline to actually submit for an RFP. But as far as final dates, that would have to be in tandem with our finance department. So even the draft itself may not have an actual date listed for a site visit, but it would be something along the lines of once posted, 10 to 14 days thereafter is what would be.
So it's a target based on a point less certain at the time it's final,
Yes.
but yet it captures the legal amounts of time and posting.
And Chair, we can talk more about the timeline towards the end of this meeting, because part of the question is if y'all want to meet again in January before we post this to review the draft, then we'll have to build that timeline off of that. Now, if everybody feels like if we make the changes discussed today and then it would be ready to post, then that might mean even then that we're talking mid-January to late January for that in-person walkthrough.
Mm-hmm.
And so it just kind of depends, because we got to give ourselves time to work with finance as well.
Right. Patrick, when we met with the mayor, did you get I got the impression that the January meeting that we would have would be discussing the draft that staff puts together.
Yeah.
And if you guys are already
Good.
ahead on that, and then because then that would include committee assignment of the third commissioner
Yes.
as well.
Well, that works for us,
Does that work
and
for
then
you?
we can work to incorporate the changes and present those at that January meeting.
Okay.
I have, Madam Chair, I have a question about process for the applicant. Just make sure the legalese is correct. So another mandatory site visit by the applicant. So after the applicant applies, or 10 to 14 days after the application closes, RP closes, does their site visit?
What it would be, Commissioner, is once the draft is completed and we post the draft for everyone to see, that 10 to 14 days from that date is when we would do the site visit. And that still gives them time to decide whether or not this is something they're wanting to pursue as an applicant, or to adjust their draft that they may have already started the first week. So it's going to be based on when it's posted, not from when it's applied for.
So that's a couple of weeks from the posting. Then people know whether they're going to apply. Like last time, there was a lot more visitors than applicants.
Yes.
And so
Yes.
that allows people to, and then did you catch it? And then it'll be a couple, 2 to 3 weeks after that date of a mandatory visit that the posting would close for applicants.
Yeah.
But that'll be set after the draft is approved in our next committee meeting,
That's correct.
is our aim, I think.
I think the only thing we would have to finalize is the actual dates would be subject to finance, but what we can do is put those parameters in there that say, once posted, 10 to 14 days for the site visit. And then in general, from the date posted, do we close it 30 days or 45 days? How long do we give them? But all those final dates will be determined by finance. It's just a matter of the set parameters, the marks that you want them to meet. And so they'll certainly adhere to those from the day that it's posted.
So Commissioner, just as an example, in the previous RFP, we had this was published on July 25th,
Mhm.
and the walkthrough was on August 9th. Now, when we sent this as a committee to finance, those dates weren't necessarily filled in because we didn't know when finance would post it, but we gave them those parameters. So it'll be something similar to that, if that works for everybody.
Okay, so that kind of summarizes our process now. So, Josh, how did you want to share what you guys have?
Yes, no problem, committee. We just wanted to spend time with y'all discussing what you think needs to be included in the RFP that might not have been included last time. And I think the staff that had been part of the scoring committee came with ideas as well. And so the hope is that the four of y'all, which is inclusive of our chair, our commissioner, and our two staff members in the scoring committee, we wanted to inform the update of the RFP language with ideas that have been discussed. And so hopefully we can share those ideas today. And that interim Central Services Director Gavin Hassler and myself, we can help take those ideas and inform the language of the updated RFP and bring that back to y'all in January. So I think, the floor is open to everybody, however you want, Chair, to have the conversation. And we want to make sure to inform the update of the RFP.
Okay, all right. You want me to start first and y'all let me know as we go? I think that one of the main things, again, with Patrick and I meeting with the mayor of the committee to move forward, was to capture that the first floor would be used in a solution for ACC Gov space allocation needs for use. However, that would be outlined or described, I guess.
Can I ask a question to that, Commissioner Wright? Do you anticipate us essentially saying that first floor is off limits to any of these applicants, that essentially they need to focus on the second and third floor, and that ACC Gov reserves the use of that first space? Or do you anticipate getting ideas from an applicant about how ACC Gov could potentially use that first floor?
Well, I guess it also would piggyback on learning a little bit more about who pays for what. Do we learn that from that tenants currently in our buildings, they take care of and pay for what's inside and we take care of what's outside? Is that a summary? That's what the mayor implied, which is why we wanted to study it a little bit more. So help me out with that.
Are you referring to secondary agencies?
Yes.
Okay, secondary agencies, they pay for their utilities.
Okay.
Maintenance and repair of the building is facilities management, and then landscape management does the landscaping.
So that isn't as simple as described. And then, is that something that you guys could make more, could be clearer with additional details? Is that part of what you can share with us?
We have another lease that's got some language in it that kind of goes into that a little bit more. But I guess it would just determine on exactly how we want to do that. Things that could be put in there would be that the leasing is responsible for the maintenance, repair, and replacement of all their appliances and all related expenses. That they're responsible for just general maintenance and repairs of let's see, I've got a bunch, I've printed out a bunch of stuff here. I'll be more than happy to give you a copy of this if you would like it. I guess it just depends on exactly what we want them to do. One of the statements is that leaseor ACC Gov does not provide general labor such as moving furniture, books, shelves, modifying building components, general housekeeping. But we do provide the maintenance and repair of the existing major systems, electrical, HVAC, carpentry, plumbing, fire safety, and graffiti removal.
Right, right.
I think, Commissioner, it's depending upon who it's intended for. I think if the intent is to reserve that basement space for ACC Gov, there's a way for us to write the RFP that basically says, concentrate on the second and third floors because the first floor is off limits. We don't have a plan for it yet, maybe, but we intend to use it
Right.
for our own purposes. And we're responsible for whatever takes place in that first floor in terms of cost and things like that, because we're the users. If the intent, though, however, is to somehow split that basement where only a portion of it is ACC Gov and the other portion is, part of this overall use of the space, or that we're open to seeing how they intend to use the first floor and then deciding whether or not we want to kind of take that away and keep it for ourselves. I think it's just a matter of how we write that up, that'll really align staff with how best to word those conditions.
Well, I guess what I was envisioning is if someone who is currently is already one of our tenants and they wanted to move in there, that would solve a space allocation need for us.
Yes. So I see what you're saying.
So that, which frees up another space.
Yeah.
So does that give you enough information?
Well, could I just ask a follow-up question, Chair, and Beth, maybe this is a question for you too. Are you saying we would request potentially a bid that's just for the first floor as an application in partnership with this? So you could either ask for the first floor, or you could ask for the second and third.
Because can't they currently they're keyed differently? The museum part, no,
They're all keyed the same, but they can be keyed.
they can be keyed separately.
Internal staircase can be separated.
I think it can.
Could we word it somehow to where it says, like, if you're a tenant already and I think what you're maybe what you're saying is if you're already a tenant in a different, I guess maybe you're thinking that a tenant already in one of our facilities maybe wants to move to that
Yes.
facility. So then they would be vacating the other. Yeah, so I'm not sure how we would word
It
that.
basically solves some of our space allocation,
Mhm.
I don't want to say issues, but challenges that we're working on. With that, as well as knowing that a lot of work needs to be done down in that specific area.
And these contracts, or these RP agreements, they are set in time. It's a year, correct? So, and above, ACC solves our space needs in 5 years, right? Like we have all the space. So we have to come back to this process with the Telegrid House and the application. So like if ACC uses that first floor and then let's say we build this, we get the full courthouse and we put all ACC facilities there. So then what happens?
Yeah, I think it is time relevant.
Sure. I think the way that we even did the first draft of the RFP was, the way we do a lot of our tenant leases is we essentially say they're renewable every year for a set amount of time. So for example, 5 years. So what we would say is you're good to go. There's a commitment, a joint commitment for a total of 5 years. However, each year there's an annual renewal that both parties have to agree to. And at the end of that 5-year period is when you sort of just, as a whole, rethink the entire contract. And you can either go out to bid again, or could develop a new one, but they're good for essentially 1 year at a time, but you can say like for a block of time as well.
Right, so the relationship is solidified
Yes.
for a certain amount of time. But would that, now that you described that, would that also be what's happening when we start using our public community benefit
CBA.
agreement? That annual checkpoint is also gonna be where that paperwork reviews what the rent is.
It has implication for what the rent ends up being.
Yeah,
Yep.
because the idea of and so that's another part, I think, that should be clarified in the next RFP, is that the Taylor Grady house or campus or use of it needs its own specific community benefit agreement for the idea that comes for that place.
Madam Chair, can we separate that out from ACC to the applicant or the RFP? Am I saying this right? So whoever uses the second, third floor gets their own CBA, and whoever uses the first floor?
The applicant, I think we didn't have a specific, an area for a detailed description of the community benefit agreement for that campus.
Correct. It would be on a per tenant space basis. So if we essentially said the first floor is its own tenant space and the other 2 floors are their own with different tenants, then yes, you would essentially have the possibility of 2 CBAs. The one thing I want to be clear about though with the CBA is unless we specifically limit applicants to the RFP as it's not just nonprofits, but it's pretty close to, I'll just say nonprofits, because that's where the CBAs kick in. It's not, if you're a commercial entity, you know, or even a government agency, but you receive certain amount of funding from ACC Gov, that already restricts and details what rent you are going to pay. It's the CBA that kicks in for essentially the nonprofits. So unless we say the only people that can apply for the RFP are nonprofit agencies, that's how we could only put in there that you're required to do the CBA. Because if we got a for-profit entity for either one of those floors, they wouldn't be required, nor could they.
Yeah, so if you're anticipating a reduction in rent from a community benefits agreement, we need to see what that is.
Yes.
Is what I'm visualizing.
Yes. And I would agree. I think we can word it in a way that basically says if you're anticipating use of a CBA, it should be submitted as part of the process.
Yeah.
But it's not required, you know.
That's right. And because I think I feel like when we had 3 commissioners who were sitting here, and the aim was opening this up for the community, without, I mean, I know we're going to have more details here, but I'm trying not to make it more restrictive at the same time.
Yeah, you don't have to have a CBA,
That's right.
Yeah.
but if you want a certain price, then that's where the CBAs become an incentive. And we've got a meeting tomorrow morning with the current leases just to talk about the updated policy that hasn't been put into effect yet, but that is coming because there's a timeline they need to follow in order to make sure they're submitting their CBAs in time after everything get approved. So we're still talking about it.
Yeah.
When it was approved a couple of years ago. So, you know, I think that it's still new to everybody because it actually hasn't been implemented yet. And so
that's why I think it's important for the details of that, because this is going to be happening, and at the time that we're brushing that off.
right.
I wanted to go back to your concern about how to put an RFP about is the first floor totally off limits. Did we decide on that? Because I'm wondering if we could do something as simple, I mean, it may be too simplified, but saying the first floor is off limits unless you are a tenant of another facility and then you know, that is wanting to move here, then we would consider that. I don't know if we can get that specific in an RFP or not.
Well, if we can word it to where it's solving a space allocation need,
No. And I'm not
directly
trying,
or indirectly, but that's where I mean, it's my little idea, but I'm wanting to make sure it can be put
Yeah.
forth.
so my only concern with all of this, and I apologize, Commissioner, I'm not trying to derail this. I think there's ways that we can go about it, is if the intent is to somehow, some way rent out the bottom floor as its own leased area, I do have a concern from the current condition standpoint, in that in the previous RFP, you could essentially utilize the basement as part of your overall operation, but almost as an ancillary area. If you wanted to use it for storage, or
Yeah.
for some staff area, something like that. To bring it, and Beth may be able to correct me, but to bring it up to code potentially as its own space, because I think at one point in time when we had looked at it from an internal standpoint for ACC Gov purposes, it's essentially the same thing. If we were to only lease out the second and third floor and keep it either for just ACC Gov use or even for a separate lease, there's a certain amount of work, I think, that from a code standpoint may be required to create that as its own leasable tenant space, as opposed to the current condition, which if utilized in conjunction with the second and third floor and just for storage or to put an office or something like that, it's not its own leased space, and there's a different building code essentially for that. Does that make sense at all?
It does, it's real similar to the first floor of Costa.
Right.
Yes.
Very similar that, it's like, I get my own key to this.
Yeah. So my concern though is just the preparation potentially
Mhm.
and the cost of that in order to prepare that space for use, whether that's for ACC Gov or for even one of our other lessees potentially. Unless we were to somehow just word it that cost is borne by the applicant.
Right, so if currently it's cost prohibitive for us to fix it up and use it for our space allocation needs, would it be better for us to shutter it till we tackle the big, because that's what I wanted to tackle, some bigger space allocation discussions before we,
Well,
so, I mean, and I think that it would maybe beneficial for staff to outline the reality
Yeah.
of that for the committee. I don't know that today, if you've got details today for that, I welcome it. Otherwise, in January, would that,
We can certainly bring forward more details in January. I don't want to obviously delay anything that doesn't need to be delayed. I know that we did look at this a couple months ago. If we were to use it strictly for ACC Gov purposes, put another department in there, for example, there was a decent cost to it. I don't know if, I wouldn't say it was necessarily prohibitive. I think it's just a matter of dollars and the value of that space. So I want to say initially we had about a $200,000 to $250,000, if that rings a bell, Beth, cost estimate to bring that space up to code for its own leasable space. But I think that's the reality, that whether it's for ACC Gov or for any other tenant as its own space,
Right.
someone's looking at that cost.
yeah,
To prepare the space, unless we just sort of keep it as it is, where if you find a use for it as part of your overall operation of the second and third floor, fantastic, but to say that it's its own address and has its own, leasable space,
right,
that's a little bit different, I think.
right.
and
And-
Madam Chair, I appreciate the point you're making and the questions you've asked previously about the total facilities needs. And I think part of the challenge we're gonna have central services and the manager's office telling you what it is They don't know what's happening with the judicial center yet, which would be a potential large opportunity to staff, to move staff to the old courthouse once it becomes the old courthouse. We don't know what's happening with Costa yet. If ACC Gov employees were able to utilize 2 floors of Costa, we might not need to think about, the need of another facility. But if the judicial center doesn't turn out, if Costa doesn't turn out, then we're gonna be asking some big questions to your point of, well, where do we put our employees?
Yeah,
And so I hear you, I appreciate what you're saying. Until those kind of 2 things occur though,
right,
it'll be hard to really know how much we might need this for. Because at that point, we might say, hey, the cost is worth it because we don't have anywhere else to put employees.
right.
And the Doherty roof, the Satula roof, and all those are gonna come due. And what are we gonna do? So that's kind of where we're at. And so I appreciate what you're saying.
Right, and then, we've got, what fire hall is it that's about to have $150,000 renovations?
Yeah, so the old fire station, number 2 on Elm Highway.
Old two.
Yeah, oh, yeah.
So that's what to me, that's a perfect example of where I was getting that uh-oh feeling about, what would happen there. So would the RFP say that if the applicant wanted to use the first floor, it's as is? But then does that get away from the code issues that you thought about it being?
Wouldn't they have to update it?
Well, I think there's a way for us to word it that it's as is, as part of the overall house. That there is no, even as the lessee deciding to subdivide and sort of lease out that basement to someone else or for another purpose. It's, if you would like to utilize the first floor, that's great. It comes with the second and the third floor, but it all stays open. It kind of all stays as is. And if code right now says that you can't put offices down there in the basement and you can only use it for storage, then that's kind of what you're left with.
Gotcha. And if somebody filling out the application after they've done the walkthrough says, can you just lock that door and we'll never go down there?
Yeah.
That would be part of what they would put in the details
Correct.
to move forward.
Yep.
So Patrick, did he just capture what
Yeah.
we want to see in the RFP?
Yeah.
Because I
Can you
think-
make the
Yeah.
options are there, but there's more details to those options now.
I think to answer your question, Commissioner Davenport, if someone wanted to propose some changes to the first floor, I think we'd be certainly willing to listen and look at that. But again, that's with the expectation that they're bearing the entire cost essentially of that, and that those plans have to be approved by ACC Gov and the powers that be. But yeah, I wouldn't want an applicant to go into it though thinking, I'd like to use this first floor space, and by the way, here's what I want to use it for, and here's the price tag, I'd like you to pay for that. I think that's what the committee would like to steer away from perhaps. So,
Okay, all right. What's another topic?
Yeah, so Madam Chair, if, Beth had talked a little bit about appliances. Were there a couple other things related to equipment that you want to talk about, Beth? I mean,
They need to understand that they have to pay for all their utilities, that they're responsible for all their utilities, and that they have to use, ACC Gov solid waste and comply with that solid waste policy. And I don't think we included that in the other one. We may have included the utilities, but I don't know that we included the solid waste.
I skipped that, yeah.
Including composting.
Yeah.
I mean, all the.
Anything.
Yeah, okay.
Other things, we just get really specific on things that we allow and don't allow. Things like, no space heaters, don't use whites in the restrooms,
Yeah, no flushing.
yeah, no smoking, no vaping, things like that.
Do you think we would be clearer on the no baking if we remove the stove? Because it implies that we can, even though it doesn't have the back to code.
Yeah, I think, Commissioner, what we intend to do, if we haven't already, and Beth can correct me, but on the basement level where there was at one time a residential, there was a kitchen there. That any appliances associated with that kitchen would be removed prior to this new tent to ensure that they understand that is not a living quarters and that is not a commercial kitchen. And then I think we could also even spell out the second floor, what almost is more of a traditional kitchen, but actually does not have a commercial hood, or is even up to code for cooking. It's basically for refrigeration and warming, kind of a prep area. We could spell that out a little bit clearer to make sure that they understand that that is not a kitchen. And quite honestly, again, that's something that the committee could certainly decide on, but I would almost go a step further to clarify that there's no alternative to that even in their proposal, if they're trying to turn it into a kitchen, we may not go along with that because A, it's a significant cost, and B, there are alterations to the house itself in terms of installing a hood and venting system that we may or may not want to see.
Yeah,
Yeah, let's go to action step.
Okay.
yeah, I think clarifying that is good. Speaking of equipment, the ADA elevator, how can we clarify that?
We need a statement similar to that they're responsible for making sure that the handicap lift is used as intended and not used as a freight elevator. It needs to be specified that, if it's determined that it was used as a freight elevator, they are responsible 100%.
For the repair.
Yes, ma'am.
And
Or
because
replacement.
that, when you listed the bigger things we are responsible for, that is unique. It's a big thing, but it also has rules.
And it has been used as a freight elevator in the past. So, and it's this one.
No, I just wanted to ask, just from an evidentiary perspective, like how could we possibly determine that it was being used? I mean, other than that it broke, but how can we prove that it was by a freight, being used as freight?
We just have to go by the, elevator company that inspects it for us,
Okay.
and they tell us that,
I think there
Or if
would
we get there
be,
and it's full of chairs.
yeah.
It's broken with.
I'm asking
Yes.
from the legal perspective,
Yeah.
because I think you mentioned it was a huge sum of money the last time it was used, and it sounded like we paid for that.
Yes.
So I'm wondering if we need to install a camera or something to make sure we have some evidence as to how it was used and how.
Right.
Very good idea.
Yeah, or if there's something new that it doesn't work with too much weight. I mean, there could be that as well. But, I guess if staff could look into what, I think we maybe should have done that the last time it broke. But it's a good idea if that's something that we can upgrade or at least learn what that would cost.
I can check on that.
So another topic that had come up in previous conversations, y'all, was parking. There's some questions. I think that's something that's worth updating language in this. So I just want to make sure y'all as a committee talk through that as a topic.
So all applicant must present an agreement with the property owner for any additional parking.
A memorandum of understanding,
Yeah.
for off-campus parking, or
Yeah.
off-site. I was wondering also too about the need for a memorandum of understanding, for the alternatives to that, mass transit, not, the memorandum of understanding for other transportation solutions.
I think we could go either way, Commissioner, in our scoring criteria, of the previous RFP. That was one of the criteria is how you plan to address not only parking, but any other modes of transportation. So it's already in there as a scoring criteria that, could either hurt them or benefit them based on the
Okay.
score. But if you wanted to, we could go the step further and say that as part of your submittal, you're required to include an actual agreement or MOU in your submittal. That's certainly up to the committee to decide.
I think that would be a good idea.
Okay.
I think that might help.
Okay. And not just for parking, but for all transportation.
Transportation solutions.
Okay.
which is also a parking solution. Did you guys think that we needed to enhance the description of the shared partnership, since this is two tenants, Town and Gown, and the Taylor Grady House? Did you guys come up with some ideas on that?
In terms of the timing of the sharing of dates, if they're
Well, the
within the same day, so we're
sharing-
kind of collaborate around those
The
dates.
sharing of dates, if I had a magic wand, it'd be that, no amplified noise events were on the dates of the Town and Gown events. They've given us 4 years of their dates. It could be that those dates are also community benefit agreement events I keep going back to that darn Easter egg bunny rabbit thing. Remember the costume that was in the
Community
kitchen?
events on the same day.
So it could be that, I'm not sure how we would articulate that, but that could solve it if it's not, because I think it highlights the partnership of the campus.
Well, my only concern with that is that it looks like we're showing favoritism to Town and Gown, because they did give us their schedule, and that's great. But it looks like, okay, this is their schedule, you have to work around it.
Mhm.
I don't know if that would be a problem or not.
I think, Sherry, you had.
Yeah, we talked about it last time. I think there's a lot of understandable, I'm not talking very well today. I think it's understandable to say that you are a tenant who's moving into an already existing building where there's another tenant who obviously has to make plans, and we don't know when the new tenant will be installed. And so I think it is reasonable, like I think there's a rational basis for why we would say that for this year, you need to be able to work around their schedule. But I certainly think that should only be for a limited period, maybe even, I feel like 6 months is probably too short for a group like Town and Gown, but at least for future years, that they need to be able to work together, just like we've talked about in the past and was part of the lease agreement. So that's my thought.
Given that, realistically, the process and how it all plays out with the new RFP, you're probably not looking at a new tenant at least until almost the new fiscal year in July, let's just say. So would it be if we included language that said for the fiscal year 24, the new tenant shall adhere to the schedule of Town and Gown with regard to amplified music, not necessarily that they can't have an event, but at least with the amplified music. And that years thereafter, that we can include the same language that we already put in their leases about working together, and that there are steps of reconciliation, that we would go through as staff if there are issues.
Yeah, because I think that gives us a little more hands-on introduction for this new pairing. Because the previous tenant, and Town and Gown already had those years of time together. And anything we can do, I think, to smooth out, this new team, would be good.
And also just parking as well.
Because that's that's.
So like, maybe put in communicate parking needs. If they're both having 2 events at the same time, I would hate to be off the press that day, so.
So Madam Chair, you brought up kind of 2 topics that are combined. I heard you bring up community events and wanting to encourage more community access to Taylor Grady. Let's just talk about your ideas around that as a standalone, right? So are there a certain number of events that you would want to see in a given year that would be open to all in the community, or how might we work that in?
I was hoping that there would be more open dates, but I didn't know what the number would be or how to articulate it. That's where I didn't know. Again, I wanted to study it a little bit more, learn how staffing or how things, I don't know if Linden House is the best example, because there's probably regular things that are happening ACC Gov, and then there's opportunity for public to also schedule things. So I'm naive to what that is and would love to learn or give you guys time just how it or,
Yeah, I mean, we can certainly look into that, and I think just thinking out loud, there may be a way that you can assign almost a percentage to it. So for example, if you were to say that any events throughout the course of the year on the weekend, if you're not necessarily worried about Monday through Friday, but more, the Saturday and Sunday events, you could say that throughout the 52 weekends a year, 25% of those are required to be, CBA aligned, events of some kind, as opposed to the other 75% that may be for more private, type use or something like that.
So, and just correct me if I'm wrong. So we're forcing then we would be forcing the applicant to say 25%. You have to look for throughout the community. 25% of the year to have events. Instead of, can we word it to say in good faith or attempt to try?
Certain.
Okay. Do you get what I'm saying? Like, because there may be people or their dates may not align with community days. So, like some a community partner may be like, I want to use it today, but y'all already have an event, so then they lose out on that 25%. So by the end of the year,
yeah, especially if it's somebody new with a new idea, a new community benefits agreement, there's got to be a chance to market it and get it out into the public. I guess I would score highly of applicant that is providing a public event that you don't have to be a member of something to be going to it. Not a dues paying event type thing. I mean, there could be a fee or registration so that the numbers, because there's going to be a limited capacity, and you can't have 300 kids come to see the Easter Bunny in a 2-hour time frame. But there's ways to space it out, have the time on around Easter, just as this example, for the community to catch on that that's something. I hear visiting Santa at the Classic Center is ahead. So it takes a while for them to happen. So, and another thing that it's similar to when I was in the bar and restaurant business is that when it changed to where you would be open on Sunday, you had to have 50% of your revenue by food. But if you didn't have food first because you were bar, so you had like a year to prove your revenue of that threshold. So that's first thing that came to my mind. You have an idea of what would be a percentage that's fair and reasonable, a goal. And it seems like to me that next year when the community benefit agreement comes, if this person is going for the community benefit agreement applicant, then we would be able to see how many days was it used for that. And then that would help us know if the community benefit agreement, how close they matched their ambitions.
Well, what we can do is, the percentage was just an idea, but I see what you're saying. I think what we can do is we've already sort of had a clause in the scoring criteria already about the public benefit. I think there's a way for us to refine that language in the RFP to sort of capture what y'all are saying about if asking for a community benefit, and the intent of this lease is to reach, the entire public entity. And so specify or detail as part of your score, how you intend to do that. And so I think we can emphasize that a little bit more in the criteria.
Right. Getting the detail in the application would be great.
And what if the CBA went to the same entity every time? Can we stipulate that it has to be a broad group in the community?
Well, I think that the CBA itself is tied to a lease or an applicant. And so it has to stay with the agency that essentially has the lease with us. And the thing about a CBA, and again, I know we haven't really implemented them before, is when you read the language, if approved for a CBA, and things don't necessarily change in terms of the terms of the lease from year to year, that CBA is actually good for more than just 1 year. It essentially is allowed for that duration of renewals until such time as we change the terms or the lease, changes hands, or they no longer, provide a community benefit. It's not to say, it basically says you don't have to do a new one, but that every year when the renewal comes up, the commission has the right to ask how the CBA is comparing to what they proposed.
Okay.
Yeah.
And Patrick was on GOC for this, so you have a little more insight and study from me, because I was in LRC and really less background on that. But I think that those checkpoints are going to be built in, and interestingly enough, we're here with Taylor Grady House being available because the past tenant did not want to fulfill a community benefits agreement to see where they might be on the rent reduction.
Sure.
In that respect.
Another one of the items that came up, I know we're running out of time, was changes, alterations to the inside, as well as the landscape. So, I don't know if the committee's interested in adjusting the RFP to outline what would be acceptable versus not in terms of landscaping and cosmetic alterations to the inside of the house. I don't know where y'all are at in that.
I would be happy with staff providing more detail in the RFP. Patrick, did you have anything?
Yeah, for facility management, when it comes to the grounds, you guys say, we'll take care of the grounds X amount of days. Anything additional, the applicant is responsible for, correct?
That is correct. That essentially, we cut it in cycles, let's say once a week or something like that. And that includes the lawn cutting and the pruning and things like that.
'Cause I remember in GLCs, one tenant kept asking, we'll come and cut the grass or do some painting, forget what it was, and then it will wear out, and then like, we will come back, they will ask for us to come back and, I think it was cutting the grass, and the grass would grow a little bit, and then they would ask us to come back outside of that. Were we responsible for, was the tenant responsible for paying for that, or did ACC cover that?
I don't know that specific instance, but, we do get callbacks sometimes or requests for special events like, hey, I know you just cut it, but 4 days later, we're about to have another event. We'd like to have it freshly cut. Again, subject to the committee, staff doesn't necessarily have the capacity to do that. So either we would have to agree to allow them to do it on their own at their own cost, which is a possibility. I would say though that there's also a risk with that essentially we now, it's still our property and we're letting someone come in and either prune the bushes or cut the grass and scalp it, kind of, really low. And, we would be left to deal with it.
Is there a standard when it comes to maintenance that like, if you do it on your own outside of regular, that it has to be 3 inches off the ground or something?
No, there's.
That you can't cut 1/3 of the grass at a time. It kills it. You have to gradually if it's too high.
But we don't necessarily go back and cut grass just because they asked us to,
No,
right?
no,
I mean,
we not.
we maintain, landscape maintains those facilities at the same level they do all Athens-Clarke County government facilities. So I don't know why they would make return calls just to cut the grass because the tenant said they need it cut.
They wouldn't. I think it would just be us specifying our intent that either, listen, the grass is the way it is and you just have to, do your proposal around that, knowing that it's only going to be cut every 10 days and that you're not allowed to hire somebody else to cut it in between. Or we somehow specify that is something we're willing to do, but understanding that they bear the cost and we sort of bear the risk.
What are your thoughts?
I think our staff does an excellent job of maintaining the grounds, and I've never gone past Taylor Grady to where it's 9 inches high. So although it may not be cut to the same length as a golf course, I think it's certainly manageable to hold events. And, I don't think we need to get into a debate about an inch or two in terms of height of grass. I think it just is what it is and they have to leave.
So, just wanna turn over every rock though. So it's
Yeah.
springtime, it's raining all the time. We just cut the grass. There's a big event Friday. The grass grew a little more, and they like it's gonna be an outside party. They don't like it. The tenant was like, well, ACC just cut the grass Monday. Now it rained Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday, and I'm having this event Friday. The grass is high. Got this little crabgrass. ACC is not going back and cut that grass. The tenant is probably gonna be upset and be like, "Well, I'm gonna get a lawnmower from Lowe's and mow this thing over." So just walk me through that step.
I think the way you said it is correct. I think right now, Commissioner, the way it's set up is we are responsible for the grass on a set period. And although we can certainly adjust that according to weather ourselves, if it rains for 3 days, we won't, either we would have cut it beforehand or we'll delay it and cut it after. But at the same time, we're not going to be necessarily amenable to a tenant saying, hey, I've got an event on Saturday, I need you to come cut the grass on Friday.
Any penalties?
There are no penalties, we don't necessarily have somebody out there checking to make sure whether or not somebody came in with a lawnmower and cut it. I think, there's a difference between, I guess, them taking it on themselves quietly and bearing the risk, knowing that we never gave them permission to do that, versus us specifying in writing, like, this is what you do or don't do, and this is what we allow and don't allow.
That's fine in writing. Do and don't do.
Okay, all right.
And then also, as I'm picturing that, part of me was thinking, well, maybe Taylor Brady, if the bulk of their events are on the weekend, maybe Wednesdays could be the cut day versus Monday. But yet, you also can't cut when there's an event. So you guys are also literally cutting around the occupancies that are happening. You're not, I'm sure the parks and stuff are being cut, not while kids are in school versus out. But anyway, so there's a lot, I guess the additional detail can capture that we have a lot of properties. We don't have a lot of staff. And the scheduling of what needs to be done has protocols that make it work. In that respect,
One more thing, in the same regard when it comes to maintenance of the facility. So like, we come in and we paint. We come in and paint Monday. They have an event Tuesday. The walls are scuffed. They have another event Wednesday. Hey, ACC, no, we're not. You cannot fix.
but that's part of the scheduling.
Yes,
In
ma'am.
my mind, the lawn care is on a 10-day schedule. The interior painting is we already know that schedule. So do we want to put that detail in the RFP and then talk about what we as a landlord approve or don't approve on painting inside that's not ours or our cycle?
I think you can put that schedule in the RFP if you would like to, by all means, but I do think we do need to have wording in there that they're not allowed to paint or alter the walls or floors in any way, at all. And that they're, 100% responsible for the damage if they do.
Because that's sort of, it's a big house. That's
Yes.
part of the big stuff we're responsible for.
And I think we also should put in there that to stop unnecessary after-hour phone calls at night and on weekends, we need to have some wording similar to what's in the other, that they have to report all their work orders to facilities management in a timely manner, and emergency work orders immediately. Work required to be completed after the normal operating hours of facilities management, Monday through Friday, 7 to 3:30, will be billed at an overtime rate of the employee for a minimum of 6 hours.
Okay. I had that.
Is that state law? Can we do double?
We can put, this is not state law, so
Okay.
this is, if you want to do 12 hours, we can do 12 hours,
Let's do that.
okay?
Speaking of a true businessman,
Wait,
thank
is
you.
that in the advanced behavioral?
Yes, ma'am.
So we need to make them consistent, right?
Okay.
You can't have 6 hours in one and 12 hours in another.
Okay.
I think.
Well, that's part of what I do,
Yeah.
that's where the learning I wanted to do was
Sure.
understanding. So, but Kelly was right, the staff's got this,
Okay.
we'll be consistent, Patrick, you're okay with that? And then I did have that topic, but wasn't sure how to answer it, and you've got that.
And there's a way for us to specify that where, you know, again, because it is an ACC Gov property and building, and things happen, you know, if it is, we can specify certain work that is exempt from that, that after hours billing. You know, if there's truly a water main break that just happens, and it's not the fault of anyone else other than it's an old pipe,
Yeah.
and it's on a Sunday, well, we don't want the house to flood. So
Yeah,
We're gonna respect.
we're gonna go ahead and take care of that.
Yes.
But, you know, there's a list of things that we'll specify that we cover. Anything that's not on that list essentially is subject to that clause.
Like somebody punch a hole in the wall.
Yeah.
Okay.
They're gonna be,
This- this
they're gonna
is-
be in the emergency room, because it's horsehair platter on you.
This would stop things that they think is an emergency, but is not true. One stopped up toilet when you've got four more, or a light blown, or,
Yeah.
you know. It'll stop things that they might think is an emergency or just a, inconvenience
Okay.
versus what truly is.
And we're right at the 5 o'clock clock, and you guys don't have to answer this now, but do we need to include something that talks about the two outbuildings?
I think, again, we're open to whatever the committee suggests, but as far as the outbuildings, I don't necessarily from a staff standpoint have a problem with use of those buildings for storage. Or in an as-is condition. To me, there's a cost benefit to trying to repair or maintain those two outbuildings other than, you know, the fact that they're outbuildings. But, that's just my thoughts on it. So,
Well, as is full of stuff right now, right? If that were to be, if an applicant wanted to use it as is empty,
mhm.
is that gonna mess up our lawn care storage, or, I mean, we can adjust?
Correct. And, you know, the storage that's out there is essentially for the applicant. So
Oh, okay.
that's not ACC Gov storage.
I
out
just,
there. Yeah.
did not know that.
So,
Didn't know that.
you know, in the past, it's been used for chairs for events and tables and things like that. And, you know, we're perfectly fine with that. Whether they choose to keep it open and somehow incorporate it as part of the experience, you know, people can sort of poke their head in there. At the same time, that's all it can really be. You know, I don't think we're looking for modifications to those buildings that all of a sudden make them habitable as an office or anything like that. I think that there's a historic component to that and then a bringing up to code
Right,
component of that.
okay.
Yeah.
Okay, and then, so if there's more details
Mhm.
in that respect, I also didn't want it to become empty and open and someone deciding they wanted to dwell in it.
Sure, sure.
So we also need to make sure it's secure
Yes.
from becoming, inhabited,
Okay.
either for a minute.
Yeah.
Or overnight, or.
Our chipmunk, so.
Oh, yeah, I forgot that. What else? You guys have done a great job. You've covered, a lot of details. Is there any touch points, feedback on us on something else?
Just one last question, and I apologize. One other bullet point that I think came about is the subleasing. And so I think for clarification, again, this is subject to the committee, but we probably need to address that in that the lease that we're having, you know, if it's with an entity, but clearly that entity holds events. To me, I view that as part of their business operation, and that's something that we're agreeing to with that specific leasee. What's different in my mind is all of a sudden taking a corner of the building and saying, okay, we're going to sublease this long-term, 365 days a year to office use of some kind that has nothing to do and no affiliation with the actual lease that we have.
For the community.
Correct. So, you know, is that something that the committee would like to see language in the RFP about?
I would, and, because I can think of an example right now that I would like it to be in a lease for. So if we start with this and that maybe, there'll be another, maybe GOC will get another crack as you guys are going through details. We can learn, somebody's getting $1 a year rent, but yet they're leasing out spaces for hundreds. I'm just not, there's something about that's not very palatable to me.
And I think there's, like we said, there's a difference between, from even Angel and I's perspective on some of our other leases, and the one I think you're referencing is different, but knowing that we're signing a lease with an agency or business whose purpose it is to hold events, temporary events that are a day or two long, that is different in my mind than a sublease of a permanent nature with a separate entity that is going to be there 365 days a year and is, not affiliated at all with what the commission originally intended the use for.
So you're talking about a short-term leasing versus a traditional leasing, if I were to use the current terms of the week.
Yes. We
Yeah.
can certainly put that language.
Just have something, however you feel that it's fair and reasonable in what we're doing.
Okay.
Anything else that we missed though?
Guys, do you think we touched on the additional detail that we feel will make this?
I think so. I think what we will do as staff is we will certainly put together a new draft and have it prepared, I guess, for the next property committee in January, if you know. And we'll do it in a way that, I think allows us, similar to the last time we did one, where, we'll try and put in the kitchen sink if we can, and then that allows you to sort of delete.
But take out the oven.
That's correct. So that allows you, it gives you an array of options that are just built into there. And if we like it, great. If we don't, we can start hitting delete.
Yeah, and I think how you had it also was key points, like,
Yes.
do you want it like this, it's either this or this? And then some of them were and. That sounds good. And then I think Josh and I talked about when we get our new commissioner, third commissioner on this committee, that we would maybe have a meeting with them to help get them up to speed to this point, and we'll wait for committee assignments, learn who's gonna be added,
Yeah.
and then we'll do a doodle poll of when we can meet. That's what I thought
Works
was.
for us.
Is that a smart idea to put, is it to put in the kitchen sink? Not put in,
I think what we
Then
would do
delete.
is we'll do our best to hit upon these points that we talked about today. And if there was any broadness or ambiguity in some of this stuff, or we felt as though you were looking for some options, we'll try to provide those. And then, that'll lead to discussion at the next meeting to where we can go with one or the other. But we won't try to, I'm not gonna try to make it 55 pages just for the sake of making it 55 pages, yeah.
Cause I thought our intent was to make sure that, in January, the RP that we have is gonna be so solid that we know, but if we make it broad, we kinda like,
Well, I'm talking broad for the purpose of the committee.
oh,
And then after the committee's said and done, the final version is gonna be what you guys all have to.
Yeah. Yeah, so if they heard one of us say more details, but once you write it out, it probably might suffice to be shorter than how we discussed it,
okay,
then we'll read it. And then especially having a new commissioner, new eyes on it, I think that's gonna be a good read through of clarity or confusion.
yeah,
All right,
alright,
Patrick,
motion to adjourn,
I second that.
all in favor?
Let's do it. Thank you, guys. Thank you. Todd, you can turn us off.
You want for that.
Or he part of it.